on the show today, Robert Uttaro. So he emailed me and said, hey, do you want to read my book? And I said, no, I don't read much, but I like the sound of what you do. It's pretty interesting. And he describes himself as an advocate, also a rape crisis counselor. We're going to be talking about some topics today that could be quite full on for listeners. So I would just say, I'm not much of one for trigger warnings, but we're probably going to hit some topics that are pretty full on. We're going to be talking about rape, sexual assault, just difficult shit that is not pleasant to think about for the vast majority of people, myself included. And when I saw this in my calendar today, I was like, oh shit, man, I'm tired. And now we're going to be talking about this. Okay, but then I thought, you know what? This is really important stuff. And avoiding discussing this stuff doesn't serve anyone. So I thought, you know what? I really want to do this. So, sir, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mark. Appreciate it.
And you're in the States, right?
Yes.
Can I hear a little bit about your journey then? So how did you get interested in what you do now? Like how does one get into that field?
Yeah, I just want to kind of add to what you already said that, trigger warnings are important with this. And for people that are listening, if you are listening, to take care of yourself. Please do something that brings peace to you. It could be writing, reading, exercising, yoga, prayer, meditation. Please take care of yourself because we may say some things that can be difficult to hear. So my journey started.
Sorry, if I could ask before, I probably should add to that. I would say to listeners, if they stop feeling their bodies, if they stop breathing, if they're flooding, freezing, dissociating, then, maybe turn off the podcast and do something which is kind of more nourishing for them. So 100% with you on that. Okay, sorry to interrupt, Robert. Off you go.
Yeah, man, when I was in college, I went to school for criminal justice, and I took a class called Women in Crime. And this was a really cool class talking about, female gang members, women in prison, things that sometimes we don't think about. And there was a big topic on the class that dealt with sexual violence on rape. Yeah. And reading a book that really moved me. It was hitting me deeply, actually. I honestly felt like God was like working in me. And then during the class, the professor had women come from a local rape crisis center to come and talk with us. And that was a class I knew I had to be there. I didn't want to skip that one. So, I went, and these three women walked in, and to me, they were like angels. Like there was a lawyer, a legal advocate, and the woman that ran the community education program. And they were so gentle and peaceful and strong. And they were women that cared so deeply about these issues. So they were talking about what they did, and they offer free services to people 24 hours a day. And I was just deeply moved by it. They were talking about, they were working with local bars in Boston, trying to train bartenders and what to look for. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like, you doing that all over the city? And they were like, no, we don't have the funding. We don't have the time. We don't have the resources to do the whole city of Boston. So these things happening. And then they showed a video, a reenactment of a perpetrator speaking. And this video was only 6 minutes. It made me crazy, man. Like I became deeply enraged. Like this psychotic rage kind of came inside of me. And then that rage turned into like a deep disgust where I honestly thought I was going to like throw up in my chair. And essentially, there were opportunities to get involved. There were opportunities to volunteer. And God was working through me, and he spoke to me and was like, will you get involved? Will you help? And I was so nervous. I was so scared. I said, yes. And after the class, I went to these women, asked to volunteer. I ultimately beat people out for an internship. They chose me to work with them, and my life's never been the same since.
Great, thank you. And I know you're a man of faith, and just for the record, I'm very comfortable with that. I know some of our listeners, maybe particularly in Europe, more secular. And I would kind of like, if you're very welcome to talk about that side of things. And I would say for listeners, just like translate that as like your inspiration or your calling. Sure. Most of us have some sense of being called to something, and sometimes it's like follow your bliss, and other times it's follow your heartbreak, right? Like that's a phrase I took from an American teacher. I forget his name now, and it sounds like to me it's like it kind of just broke you open by the sounds of things.
Yeah, it did.
And people might not know what like rape crisis counseling is, or these kind of centers. I mean, I've spoke to a couple of female friends involved in that sort of thing. But just really start like at the beginning, like what kind of services are out there? What does this stuff mean? Because in different countries, we have listeners in Russia and Saudi Arabia and many different places. So, give us the basics of what those kind of places are.
Yeah, there's some areas of the world that have phenomenal resources. There's other areas of the world that don't have the resources. But there's a lot of things online. Basically, what we were doing is we have, a 24-hour hotline where there's people volunteering, always on the phone to help with not just rape survivors, but also significant others. Anyone who's interested in learning or needs, advice, information. There's 24-hour medical advocates. So like if people, choose to go to the hospital, they have a person come out with them to be with them throughout that process to help their family members. We have, legal assistance, community education, counseling, individual counseling, group counseling. And there's also there's tons of books. There's, online chat groups. There's many different resources out there. But it was so special to me to really volunteer with a bunch of people. We all cared for the same thing. So, you said, I'm a man of faith, many people are not. And what was awesome is both believers and non-believers were there together, really caring about people affected by sexual violence, trying their best to help people through what happened to them, help them to understand they're not to blame for what happened to them, and help them to, really regain power and control for their lives. And it's a blessing to do the work. And I love everyone that I've worked with. So tons of resources out there. If you're interested, Google some stuff and see what's in your local area as well.
And let's talk about the impact of sexual trauma then. So I think most people listening to this would have some sense that it can certainly be devastating to people.
Yeah.
Most people, I think, would have it on there as one of the worst things that could happen to them, male or female or whatever. Mm-hmm. So yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about the impact of this kind of violence.
Yeah, I mean, you work with the body, you do body work, and this has a deep impact on the body. It has an impact on the body while it's happening and can even be years later. Trauma is stored in the body. People can be terrified to be touched. They can be terrified to get a massage. They can be terrified to have sex. So it has a deep effect on the body, has a deep effect on the mind, on the heart and the soul. And it is deeply connected to a lot of our depression. It's connected to a lot of our anxiety, our suicide, our eating disorders. Okay, we have some of our addiction. I'm not saying it's like the sole reason for these things, sure. But there's trauma in general, not just sexual trauma, but trauma in general is deeply linked to a lot of our mental health issues, a lot of our things that affect our choices in our day-to-day life.
And what would you say to someone that says like, hey, this is, it's horrible that it happens, but it only, some people, maybe a minority over there, I don't really want to think about it. This isn't something that really impacts my life. So I kind of, because it's uncomfortable, right? Like I don't want to, part of me doesn't want to know. So it's like, what would you say to someone that's in that kind of camp?
I would say, I've never asked anyone to do what I do. I'm not forcing anyone to do what I do. I would simply, and I understand that mindset. I really do. And that's okay. That's okay that you don't have to be this, intense advocate. But I would say to have an open heart and an open mind. And if someone ever did come to you and shared something and disclose that they've been hurt in some way, to be good to them, to listen to them, to believe them and help them, to not just shut them off and to treat them poorly.
The disclosure one is really relevant to a lot of people. So I've had partners tell me about stuff that's happened to them, and I've had students, because maybe they trust me, or we're working on boundaries, or yoga teachers get this a lot. Maybe they're doing some kind of stretch and then some kind of trauma comes out, or tears come up, or someone's really uncomfortable with like a wide hip opening position, and it's like, well, maybe there's a reason for that, And it's like, and then they disclose to the teacher. And I've had people come to me after classes and say, hey, this happened to me. And I guess in that situation, I felt like my job was, it was never easy to hear, but I had to be comfortable enough that they didn't feel judged, or they didn't feel like I was freaked out, because then it's just one more thing to them to deal with. And it's like, what, it's not nice to hear this, but I want to be able to empathize a little bit, maybe refer them to a service, like I don't want to professionally, I have no skills there, but at least I can say, hey, here's something I recommend, or here's someone you can talk to. And I think we all have a responsibility to face enough of the sort of dark side of life that when someone wants to disclose, we're not totally freaked out by it. Because if we're freaked out, we can't help anyone.
Right. I think what you did is beautiful. In some of my teachings, part of what I do is not just dealing with people directly impacted by it. I'm trying to teach people how to respond to it, what you're saying, right? So that if these things happen, how to respond to it. Because we really have the power to send someone down a path of destruction or healing, all on how we react to them. It's very powerful. So, and it's also okay to not know everything. So what you said is you're being a bridge, right? You're being a bridge to someone that might be able to help them better. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think if more of us did that, I think more people would find healing in their lives.
And I always say to all the coaches and yoga teachers and all the people that listen to this podcast, have the names of a couple of good therapists on your phone. Trauma therapists that you know and trust, that you've met, that you've had at least a friend of a friend referral about, and make sure one's male and one's female as well, because like I found there can be strong gender patterns around how people won't want to talk to a man or a woman. And you know, it ain't difficult to Google like rape crisis helpline in your country. Like Britain certainly has those, for example.
Yeah, and it's great to have those available for people if they need them. And look, this is difficult because first of all, it's just hard in general, but also so much of this is hidden. You know, if someone comes in, they get in a fight over the weekend, they have a black eye, you can see that black eye, right? Someone gets raped by whoever on a Saturday night, you most likely don't see it. So it's very difficult. So it's important that if it comes up, that yeah, you are, you know, helpful, have these things available to them. I give a simple tool. Since you brought up responding, I would like to share a simple tool I give to people, because sometimes we don't know how to respond. And that's okay too. We're human, we're flawed, right?
Sure.
So, you know, it's okay if you don't understand everything. But I give a simple tool. I ask that you bless them. It's an acronym. It's very easy. So the B stands for believe, right? I ask that you believe people. Shockingly, many people actually aren't believed. I know some people do lie, but that's a very small percentage of the human population. So believe them. If you believe them, it will make a difference in their life. The L is listen, right? I really believe we talk too much. We don't listen enough in life. So listening to someone is vitally important. E is what you already said, is empathy, right? Empathize as best as you can. Attempt to put yourself in their shoes. I'm not you, right? You are not me, but I could try to understand where you come from. The S is safety, right? So you do your best to ensure their physical safety, their emotional safety, their mental safety, their spiritual safety. And the last S is support them, right? Support them in what they need, and you've done that. And I would just add this, Mark, the fact that people came to you and shared this stuff with you meant that they trusted you enough to open up to you. So God bless you on that, man. You're doing good things.
Thank you. Yeah, I take it as a compliment if somebody does share something personal about whatever difficulties in their life or their past. And, you know, I know people do trust their teachers in this kind of field of many of the people listening. So I think we get disclosed to more than most. And then some part of me goes, wow, this could just be the tip of the iceberg, you know, like as a man, and maybe not even the most sensitive guy, like I'm probably only getting told about a tiny proportion of stuff here, right? Like if I was a female teacher, if I was, you know, different kind of person, maybe I'd be getting told a whole lot more. So I think it's real easy for people to underestimate how much this shit is happening, right? Because there's a lot of shame around it. People are worried about being blamed, worried about being believed. It's hard to know.
I mean, maybe, but there's plenty of women that don't open up to women as well, right? You know, just because we're a certain way doesn't necessarily mean just because I'm a man doesn't mean all these men are going to come talk to me. There's plenty of women that feel more comfortable with me, plenty of women that don't want to speak with me, and vice versa. So yeah, there's obviously amazing women and men throughout the world that are not necessarily like trained rape crisis counselors, but they're compassionate, empathetic, and people may go to them for a reason.
Yeah, maybe you could talk about being a man in this work, because I've only ever met women working in this work before, mostly people who had their own trauma background, their own healing journey, their own, I guess we call it post-traumatic growth, and they decided to help other people. You know, that was part of their journey, and they were super motivated for that. And it's, you know, male rape is tremendously underreported as far as I have been told. I have a friend who works for a kind of men's crisis line, not around rape, but around just general issues around guy stuff. And, you know, he says it's tremendously underreported because of the shame and the stigma. And I also heard that in the US, like the rape in the prisons, for example, is just huge, and that is kind of a stereotype, but I've heard is based on a reality. So it's maybe you could talk about the male side of things a little bit here.
Yeah, it's the least reported violent crime. So both women and men, it's underreported, and there's justified reasons why people don't report. So sometimes people that are affected feel even worse about themselves because they don't go to report. But the truth is, there's reasons why they don't report, and that's okay. With men, it's very traumatizing. Men, male on male rape, men raping little boys, and even women raping men, and women raping boys as well. So there's a shame for both, and there's immense pain for both. There's huge suffering for both. And with men, sometimes it's really, really tricky because many people have trouble, kind of, again, with your work with the body, the physiological responses to trauma. So, for example, if a man is being abused as a kid or an adult and gets an erection, what that does to the mind, to that person, that can affect them for years, because they might think they enjoyed it, they might think they want it, they might think they're gay, they might think all these things, when in reality, just sadly a natural physiological response to what someone's doing something horrific to you. So that really can affect people's minds. So that would be one example of men.
I spoke to a woman who was sexually assaulted, and she said, she felt guilty for years that she was wet, And it was like, I said to her, hey, that's your body's defense. That's your body's trying not to get hurt. And I, because I looked it up, and this person was freaking out about it, and I Googled it and shit, and it was like, turns out that's something, tell me if I'm wrong here, because I'm no expert for sure, but someone, the research I said that can happen to people as a defense, not as any sign that they're into it. So it was like, she just didn't know that.
You're 100% right. Whether you know it or not, you're a rape crisis counselor. You are definitely making a difference, man. I'm working. I know a woman that what you just said is like destroying this woman because she was wet as well. Yeah. And so it's like her body betrayed her, but she doesn't. If she can understand exactly what you're saying, and I believe she will one day, that more healing will come for her. She started the healing process. She's on a journey, but it's not like she wanted that. She didn't want to be taken off the street and raped. Like, no one does. So yeah, I think what you said is, again, spot on, beautiful. And it's so cool to talk with you right now about this.
Is there any other stuff I don't know much about this stuff. So is there any other stuff people should just know, like stuff that people aren't aware of, or stuff that you just like to be more kind of common knowledge for the good of everyone?
I think it's important for people to understand truly that it is not their fault for being hurt or assaulted. Nothing they did. It's not, the amount of drinking or clothes they wear or going out and hanging out with people. The blame is never on someone that is sexually violated. Okay. It should only be on the person who chooses to commit that crime. So I think that's really important, that people that are struggling, someone commits a crime, they never seek a day in justice. They don't, and the person that's violated is left oftentimes in years of suffering. So it's not your fault. And also it's important to understand that people really do heal. People do grow. They live perfectly functional lives. They have happy marriages. They can have kids, have healthy sexual relationships. People can grow from this. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it doesn't have to control and cripple people. And it's important, obviously, for us to educate ourselves. Oftentimes, it's actually people are hurt by someone they know. And very rarely do we think, oh, wow, that person would do that. That person would rape my niece. That would, right? You wouldn't necessarily think that. So it's important for us as human beings to just be aware of things that are happening. There's healthy touch and unhealthy touch, right? So if you see, adults, for example, it seems the vibes are a little off, could be with another adult or a kid, or if an adult's trying to like isolate a kid, step in, just see what's going on. And I think the more we can be aware, hopefully we can prevent these things. But ultimately, human beings are doing this and need to stop doing this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that, and I've heard a few more friends say this as well, that the emphasis is like, hey, here's how not to get raped. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. Isn't that putting it on the wrong side? Right. Even if it's kind of well-intended or trying to be constructive or helpful, it's still kind of putting it in the wrong place, right? It's like, shouldn't the emphasis be on the other side of that equation? You know, I mean, it's like we don't have classes on how not to get murdered. Do you know what I mean? It just strikes me as kind of odd.
Right.
I mean, I know you work in schools. How do you talk about this shit with kids and in schools? Like,
well, I work with kids in different ways, so I never bring this up. Actually, most of the kids that work with me don't know that I do this.
okay.
You know, I'm working with little 4th grade kids, 5th grade kids, little kindergarten kids. I'm not like, hey guys, you know, I'm a rape crisis counselor.
Right.
But with middle school students, I bring it up. And I've been asked to work with high school students. I come in and do trainings. And I love working with the students, kids that are really passionate about these topics. So, you know, age-appropriate topics. One of the problems, Mark, is that people, they either don't think it happens in their community, or they think the kids are too young to hear this. No, I'm not talking about, you know, rape with kindergarten kids, but an 8th grade student is not too young to hear
How
about
old
violence.
is that? So we have a different system in the UK. How old is 8th grade? That's like 12 years
Oh,
old?
sorry, like 13 and 14.
Okay. Yeah, and you can talk about consent with kids in terms of like, hey, if you're dating someone and you want to kiss them or you want to hug that person, you can still talk about the kind of key issues of things like consent without it being
Right.
like going OTT on it or to, you know, age inappropriate stuff, right? You can still talk through the basic stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and then, but also it's important for the kids to be able to ask the questions. You know, the kids, they're the one, like, to me, the kids are suffering, right? Like, so they see stuff, like they have phones, you know, they're aware of things in the world. Let them ask the questions, and we as adults.
What do they ask you? What do these like 8th graders ask you?
What's that? Many of them don't, because many of them don't, because we don't, where I'm from, what we're doing, we're not really engaging them as much. But some of them do have questions. When I have the opportunity to talk with them like this, they do have questions on consent. They do have questions on sex. Sometimes they really get into the gray areas, you know, with high school drinking and parties and stuff like that. And some of them have questions on laws, you know, laws on consent and what can be done for these things to happen. But that's not just the teaching I do. So I work with kids. I love playing games with kids. I actually teach kids how to cook. And I know you're a mixed martial arts fan, man. I love teaching kids how to box. It's so fun. Working with kids is so cool. So I do kind of like a range of teaching, if that makes sense.
Okay, got it. And sort of different topics there. And it does seem like young people, and I'm showing my age now. When I say young people, I'm thinking like 28 and below. Like know more about consent, and that's more of an issue now. Like there's more awareness of that now. Like that has changed since I was a teenager, since I was a young man. Like that has definitely changed. Like people are smarter about this stuff now. It's encouraging, right? Like I feel like it's a positive thing.
It's encouraging, and then it's also discouraging when people, adults, aren't understanding consent, or even they're not, you know, again, recommending real trainings for some of our students about these things. There's different ways we consent. Some of the ways that people, sometimes women, for example, they might say the word yes, but that could be under immense fear. And so they think that they consented and gave in. Oh, sorry, they gave in, but in reality, they didn't want to. So even saying the word doesn't necessarily mean it's consent. So that's part of my training. So, you know, we consent with our bodies, we consent with our words, we consent with our faces, we consent with our eyes. You know, we consent in different ways. And I think that needs to be taught.
Yeah.
If it is, awesome. If it isn't, we need to teach it.
When I'm teaching embodiment coaches, I say you're looking for 2 yeses. You know, one is verbal, and this is not in a sexual context. Just it could be something simple as like, hey, do you want to do this exercise? You know, like, hey, like, I need to volunteer. Do you want to could you help me out here, John, to volunteer? And one is the verbal, and one is the non-verbal. And the non-verbal means there isn't a shrinking, a backing away, a tightening, or some sense of a fight-flight response. And I say only if you get a body yes and a verbal yes, then go for it. And if you get mixed, then check. Like, hey, John, you sure, John? Because I can get another volunteer. It's no big deal. And then check that maybe, you know, we also default to the maybe is a no. That's the default when I'm training coaches. I'm like, hey, if you ask for a volunteer and someone's like, yeah, that if that looks like a maybe, then at least double check that. I think that's good for and, you know, yoga teacher adjusting people, let alone in this kind of more intimate contexts.
You're 100% right. And what you just said is a good thing to teach in life in general, but also in terms of sexual assault, and even for like younger kids, instead of going on the full on, rape, sexual violence, it's everything you just said. There's ways to show consent without even talking about sex.
Because we teach disrespect for consent from a very early age, right? Give your grandmother a kiss, or we pick kids up physically without them wanting it, or we give them a hug without checking they really want a hug. And the little kids squealing when the grandmother hugs them, that's it's showing a basic disrespect for their consent, like from the outset, right? So it's like, of course that message is going to be trained in some way.
I agree.
Well, anything else in terms of like how we treat kids that you think can kind of prevent some of this stuff? Like, might be, there's ways in which people should be educating their kids that might be helpful.
I think just human beings in general, regardless of religion, belief system, anything, we should be doing our best for children. We should, children need love, they need attention, they need to be taught things, and they need to be listened to. So I think teaching kids in a variety of different ways is a beautiful gift, and I'm so thankful to do it. I actually love doing it. And with this sometimes we react, and so when a horrible thing happens and then we react, and that's okay because we didn't know what's happened. We get mad that we don't prevent things, but we live in a very flawed world. We live in a sick world, so we can't prevent it all, right? So there's some things that we sadly can't prevent. We can hopefully prevent some and more, but what we can do is what we've been talking about, is respond well to it. We need to respond adequately to people, show them that we care, and then follow up with them as well. Sometimes, like I said, it's hidden. So someone might bring something up to you and you work with them, and you might, send them along to a therapist or a counselor, whatever it might be. But it's nice to follow up in maybe 2 weeks, a month. I know we're all busy, but like, if you have time to do that, or if it comes to you, say, hey, how you doing? Just checking in with you. Those little things actually make a big difference with these issues. And just in life in general, it's nice when someone reaches out to you randomly and says, hey Mark, how you doing? How's work? How are things? I just think life is so valuable, and people are seriously suffering. People are killing themselves over this. People are deep into drugs, deep into crime, deep into self-harm in a variety of different ways. And ultimately, people are hurting. There's just a lot of people are hurting. So if we can help them get through it, they can come out of it.
Yeah, I've come across the self-medicators before. I'm long-term sober, and I've helped quite a lot of people with that. And it's amazing the amount of people that had abuse, child abuse stories or rape stories. And it's like that was their self-medication, basically. And, it's like, when you see someone who's an addict, we don't know what they're trying to numb. That's why I try not to judge. When you see someone who's a drug addict on the street, you don't fucking know what pain they're dealing with, that fucking heroin or that alcohol or whatever is there to numb. And it's like, there's that I've definitely, it's not everyone who's an addict, but I would say maybe 50% of all the addicts and alcoholics I've worked with had some kind of sexual abuse in their background, some kind of sexual assault. So it's, worth bearing in mind when you judge that person in the street who's drunk, that maybe there's a fucking good reason they're trying not to feel,
Right.
So it's,
You're not kidding, man. I had a meeting at a prison once. At the time, there was about 100 women incarcerated. And the director of women's programming said that 75% of the women were sexually abused. And the director of mental health said, no, it's 99%. So it's like,
just 75%.
Yeah, like 99 of the 100 women were sexually abused, most likely as children, and they're in prison. And most of them were addicted to drugs, and many of them are prostitutes. Are we seeing the connections?
Yeah, being able to link those things up, and it creates a lot of compassion very quickly for places people normally judge, when you start to see these links between trauma, crime, addiction, violence, the repetitions of these things going in circles. How do you kind of keep sane doing this? Like, one of my main teachers, Paul Linden, works with abused kids, right? And like, he's just a cheery, happy guy, and he always watches Disney movies and doesn't watch horror films because he's like, I have enough bad stuff in my head. He always jokes. He's like, when he's around, I'm like, you watch a movie? He's like, as long as it's got bunny rabbits in, And it's like, how do you keep just your own mental health? Because you are staring into the abyss with this shit. And for me, I'm just talking about it for you for half an hour. It's probably the least comfortable part of my day. But doing this like every day, talking to people, like what's your secret for just good mental health when you're doing this?
For me personally, it is definitely my faith in God. It's my love of God. It's my prayer. It's my love of Jesus. But it's also, I love music. Man, music has always been helpful to me in my life. I love meditation. I love my wife. My wife is amazing, and I'm happily married, and she's in my home. And I love my stepdaughter. She's currently 17, who's like really cool teenager. Matt, like so much fun to hang out with them. So it's nice to be with them, and I'm lucky to have family and friends that do love me in this world. So kind of all that combined keeps me sane. But I have my moments, my friend.
Yeah, I can imagine you need those different kind of meaning-making processes and self-care processes there, and the support network. I mean, that's all this, whatever I would say, they're good things for anyone doing intense work, right? You need some kind of meaning-making, whether it's religious or not. You need some kind of support network, whether that's family, wife, husband, friends, whatever, and some kind of practices, whether it's prayer or meditation or whatever, to kind of deal with things. And, even then, these things can leave a mark. And I remember once I was listening to a lecture from a psychologist who worked with trauma, and he said, listen, the most disturbing thing about this work is not that you don't understand. It's like, he said, do you really want to understand what goes through the head of someone that does these terrible things like that? Because he says, listen, if I'm going to work with these people, if I'm going to heal these people, if I'm going to help these, he was working with perpetrators. That was his thing. Yep. And he said, if I'm going to work with these people, I need to get inside their heads. He's like, do you really want to go there? And my answer was no. My answer was just, no, I don't actually. Like helping, getting inside the heads of victims is bad. It's difficult enough. But going there with perps, I was just like, I can't do that. That was beyond the limits of where I would be willing to go.
Yeah. So hopefully, I continue my way. It definitely has left a mark on me. Like I said, my life's never been the same. So part of my self-care is also, like I said, working with kids. So I get to play games with children and see the joy in children, and
the side of life.
and I forget that. But in my work though, then my mind sometimes does see the kids, and I'm saying to myself, I look at behaviors. Who in the school is looking at these kids and saying which one has already been sexually abused? Right. So that's something that has affected me, and I'm like, I think that kid's been abused, or I see, or whatever it is, and that I don't know if that's healthy or unhealthy, but that is part of the change in me, that certain situations or certain things, my mind goes there. Sometimes I think I am right, but maybe there's times I'm wrong, but it does go there.
Hard to know that you see a bruise on a kid and you think, is this kid getting hit, or did they just fall over? I've definitely seen kids with weird boundary issues. Yeah. Like, it was a while back, because before COVID, I was on the tube in London, out on the subway, and this little girl came and started talking to me on the tube, and I was like, okay, that's kind of sweet and unusual, because as a guy, that generally doesn't happen. And the dad's kind of like looking like, oh, she does that. I was like, okay, no problem. So I'm chatting to this little girl, and then she sits on me. And I was just like, okay, now I'm feeling uncomfortable. And A, because that never happens as a guy, right? But B, and maybe I just was giving off a good vibe that day. And but it also just felt like she had weird boundaries, this kid. Mm-hmm. Like something's going on there that is not to be that trusting or that physical with a random dude you just met on the train. Now, said maybe I was just giving off a good vibe, maybe she's just super friendly, but it just seemed off. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, you can't get rid of that instinct. And for me, it's like, where's the line between paranoia? And there's another time years ago when I was working with kids, and there was one kid that just was, a few things were off, and I just said to the teachers, it was a school trip that I was helping with, I said, you just check out what's going on at home with that kid, okay? Just keep an extra eye on that kid. And sometimes that's all you can do, right? Because it's little signs, or, yeah, it's difficult. I don't know, man.
You're clearly empathetic, and you clearly have these insights for this stuff. And like I said, you don't even know it, but like, you're a rape crisis counselor because you're actively playing a positive role in these things. That could be, doing what you did is what we need to do. Many of us are not doing, and we might be able to prevent things, abuse from happening, or further abuse, from at least saying to another, hey, can you check in? Can you know?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it is everyone's responsibility to kind of keep an eye out. You know what I mean? To look for those signs of different behavior or different boundaries, or, bruises or whatever it is. I think it's everyone's responsibility to take a little bit of that on board, So, Listen, Robert, I think I want to wrap this up because it's a pretty heavy topic and I'm going to be teaching in 20 minutes time and I want to do my self-care before then. So is there anything you haven't talked about that you'd like to cover that you think would be useful for people to know about this topic?
Just, thank you, Mark, for having me. And this was a really cool conversation. Anyone that's out there, if you're listening, I hope this is helpful to you. If you were triggered or not, just reach out for help. Go for help. There's many different things. There's people to help the body, the mind, the heart, and the soul. Tap into people that are really care about you. Know that you are not to blame. And for the religious and non-religious, God loves you. Even if you don't even believe in God, you have a purpose on this earth. You really do. Try and figure out what that is, and make the most out of your life if you can.
Great. In terms of resources for people, there's rapecrisis.org.uk for our UK listeners. And we have a big US listeners base. So where would people kind of look up more stuff or websites to go to? Anything you recommend?
Yeah, the National Rape Crisis Center is essentially RAIN, Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, RAIN. Check that out. Just Google in your local area. You can definitely find resources. And again, there's online chat groups. Just seek it and you will find it.
Great. And I know there's, resources in Germany and other countries. So, listeners just going to need to look up their own ones, but they seem to exist most places now, which is good. So, heavy topic. I might have to give myself
a shake. How you doing, man? You good?
After this. So, listeners, I hope you're doing okay. Keep breathing. Maybe have a little move if you've been sitting down watching this, listening to this. So, Robert, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Mark, likewise. Thank you so much.
Cheers, brother. Take care. Bye-bye.